Welcome to Legs Like Mine, the podcast, where we explore lipedema through the eyes of a patient, break down the latest research, and share real-life stories of living with this often misunderstood condition. I'm Susan O'Hara from legslikeMine.com. I'm a lipedema patient, author, and an advocate, and I'm so glad you're here. Whether you're newly diagnosed or deep into your journey, this podcast is for you. Welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about something I think is really important, which is the concept of a blood test being available for lipedema. The reason why it's coming up right now is because of two things. One, all of a sudden online, I'm seeing a lot, and I mean a lot of different influencers and businesses and whatnot trying to sell information to lipedema patients about how to manage their condition and about how to become diagnosed. So I don't think it's cool that people are selling this information because one, the diagnosis criteria are clear. They're clinical only. There is no blood test out there for lipedema. There's a couple of people right now who are actually trying to sell information about what kind of blood test you should get if you have lipedema. Guys, there isn't one. They may be saying that your inflammation markers will be higher, but that is not consistent between every single lipedema patient. So that would not give you a definitive diagnosis. So I'm going to say this probably a few times during today's episode. Don't believe the hype if somebody's trying to sell you stuff. The second reason that I want to talk about a blood test for lipedema is because I watch a website called PubMed where medical research articles come out. They're published daily, and a new article just came out about some research that they're doing to hopefully get to a blood test for lipedema. So if you're waiting for the cliffhanger for me to answer it, I'm just going to go ahead and say no, but I want to tell you about the research that's happening about it. So the other thing I wanted to note is, you haven't seen me do podcasts with my face showing before, and I thought that it might be a little bit more personal if I started to turn on the camera, even though this is how I look in the morning, hairs in a bun. Most of the time I'm not wearing makeup. Today I put on mascara just for you though. Anyway, but I thought it would be more fun to try and start doing podcasts where I'm actually looking at you and talking to you. So what you're going to notice when you're on podcast with me is that my eyes are going back and forth between a couple of screens and then trying to talk to you directly. What's on my screens here, on the right-hand side, I have a copy of the actual research article that I'm talking about. And then on the left-hand side, I have some show notes that I made whenever I was actually reading through the article and trying to pull stuff out that would be important to you. So that's what I'm doing. I'm trying not to read, but I really do actually kind of write a script that I try and follow so that I can get the information in a logical order to you. So anyway, welcome to the visual podcast with me, and I hope that this works out. So all right, so I wanted to tell you about this article. It is called An Adipocytokine Signature Improves Diagnostic Accuracy for People Living with Lipedema. And I'm going to go through what is an adipocytokine here in just a second. So this article just came out in March of 2026, and the lead doctor on it, there were several, but there is a person named Dr. Thomas Ebert who has identified himself as the point of contact, like if we want to email and ask questions, which of course I have. I'm waiting for a response back to verify what I'm saying, but this was done at the University of Leipzig Medical Center in Germany, and the research is really interesting. So let's jump in, okay? So is there a blood test for lipedema? So there's this brand new research study that's suggesting that in the future we could have one. It's closer than ever. Right now, it's a little bit more nuanced, but it's really, really hopeful for us. Like in our lifetimes, we're going to see this diagnostic blood test. So this study looked at a group of 79 women, and it had women with lipedema, it had women who were lipedema and obese, and it had people who were just obese, and then it had healthy control women in the study. So this matters because one of the challenges that providers face right now is being able to tell the difference between lipedema, obesity, and lymphedema, or some combination of the three, right? We need a definitive, like non-opinionated way to tell, and a blood test is a perfect way to do that. And what they do in blood tests is they find what are called biomarkers, right? So the researchers asked the question when they started their research, are there measurable differences in the blood that could help distinguish lipedema from everything else? And this is what they were looking at. They focused on something called adipocytokines. And it sounds like a big mouthful, but if you break it up into three parts of the word, then it will make a lot more sense. So you've, of course, heard of adipose tissue, sick adipose tissue, healthy adipose tissue, that kind of thing. When you see the word adipo, it means fat. When you see the word cyto, it means cell. So fat cell, adipocyto. So it's about the fat cells. And then the last word, part of the word is kine, which basically means signal. So when you put all of that together, adipocytokines, we're getting fat signals from our cells. Or no, that's not right. We're getting signals from our fat cells, blah, 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 right? Signals from our fat cells. So our fat cells are sending messages to our body. It's like our fat tissue is texting the rest of the body saying like, hey, I'm inflamed. Here's how my metabolism's working. Here's how fat is stored. So these doctors, when they were asking the question, are there measurable differences in the blood that could help distinguish lipedema from everything else? They looked at 13 different markers in the blood samples using a lab technique called ELISA. And it's a standard way to detect proteins in blood samples. And it actually came up with some pretty interesting results. There were two markers that stood out in their research. One is called F21, and the other one is called chimerin. And the reason that this is a big deal is these proteins weren't just a little bit different in the lipedema patients. They were really different. They consistently showed a strong ability to help separate lipedema from obesity and other groups across different types of analysis. They even used a more advanced statistical model that found that the markers, when they looked at those, they improved diagnostic accuracy. And they help be able to classify patients more often. And when they combined it with other markers that they're looking at too, the accuracy reached up to 85% in some of the models. And that's a huge deal. So right now, just to share with you all, our lipedema diagnosis is and should be based only on physical appearance, whether there's pain and tenderness, and then clinical judgment based on things like family history, onset of symptoms, that sort of thing. So it's very subjective in nature. You could have one provider look at you and say, no, that's not lipedema. Another provider who would type and stage your lipedema, and another provider who says that's lymphedema. That's not even lipedema. And finally, at the fourth one, which we all love so much, is the provider who won't even consider the lipedema symptoms and who just says, you're obese, go lose weight. I'm not going to touch you or anything like that, right? So what the difference is whenever you have something that is a biomarker in the blood, it helps confirm what doctors are seeing or not seeing. And that can be a really huge step towards validation, right? So you someday will be able to request a blood test that asks to find these biomarkers and tell whether you have lipedema or not, but not yet. So what matters for you as a patient right now? There is no blood test to diagnose lipedema. There isn't one. There's no standard or widely available blood test that you can go ask your doctor for today. And including the things that these researchers found right now, you wouldn't be able to go to the doctor and say, hey, can you test my chimerin? Can you test this other component? It's just not there yet, right? The other thing to think about too is this is a relatively small study. It was cross-sectional, meaning that it looked at people at one point in time, not over time, as a lot of other studies might be. And so it needs to be validated with a larger population and a more diverse population. So this is really kind of the first step, and it's definitely not ready for everyday clinical use, right? You're not imagining your condition though, and there are measurable biological differences, and that should be telling your doctors that this isn't just weight, it's not just lifestyle, it's not a lack of effort. What's great is that research is accelerating, and I wanted to talk about that a little bit. If you go to PubMed and you put in the term lipedema or lipedema and you sort it by year, you can tell that in the last 5 years, the research has just like time over time gone over all of the other research combined since the 1960s when lipedema was first diagnosed at the Mayo Clinic. People are really getting interested in this condition because we're finding more people have it. And because it really is a women's disease. And so women's health is really being looked at right now for the first time in the history of the world and being taken very seriously. So, we're seeing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of studies in the last 5 years where from 1960 to 2015, there were just trickles of studies going on. So, the research is absolutely accelerating. And what that means is that we're starting to get a better understanding of fat biology. We're starting to find potential biomarkers that'll help us become diagnosed in a way that is objective, right? It's not subjective. It's not based on someone's opinion. And then that means that we'll be able to come up with more diagnostic tools that are readily available to our providers, right? So, just imagine the future with me for a minute, right? If this line of research continues at the pace that it is, what could happen is someday you or your daughters might be able to go in for a simple blood draw, have those multiple markers analyzed on the spot with a clinical test that's known and easily available, right? And receive a result that supports your diagnosis, right? So it's a really big deal. And that's not replacing your doctor, that's supporting your doctor with actual data that can then point them to what to do, who to refer you to, how to, help you with conservative care and that kind of thing. All we want is earlier diagnosis, less people being dismissed, and more people who are receiving targeted treatment. So, yes, there is a study. No, there isn't a blood test available today, but what we're getting closer to is clarity, recognition, and better care, and that matters. If this episode spoke to you, or if you've ever felt unheard on your lipedema journey, please know this: you are not alone. We're in this together, and we're not stopping here. Drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thanks for listening. I'm Susan O'Hara from legslikemine.com. Be kind to yourself and keep going.